Hey guys, it's Charles and welcome to ChatGCP, a medical science, clinical research and commercialization podcast. On today's episode, we are picking up right where we left off back in 2023 with another guest from Kitea Health, this time with Chief Operating Officer Natalia Lopez. In this episode, we talk about Natalia's journey from the automotive industry into medical technology, the importance of developing skills to bridge the gap between the benchtop and the patient, and dive a little deeper into the technology that is underpinning Kitea's novel device for the monitoring of physiological pressure. As usual, this was a very inspiring discussion, and I'm looking forward to a day where Kitea's vision for proactive healthcare is a reality. But on another note, today's episode is brought to you by SAPRO, your clinical trial pathway partner. Every clinical trial is unique, and the most effective solution is to engage with a distinguished and highly experienced project consultant who can tailor your needs and ensure that your trial is delivered on time with the highest integrity and all risks considered. Check out the links to SAPRO services in the show notes below. But now, dear friends, please welcome Natalia Lopez. Natalia Lopez, welcome to ChatGCP. Great to have you on today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's a bit of a double header because I just spoke with Simon Malpass a couple of weeks ago, and the episodes will probably be about a month apart. So it's nice to dovetail between the two sides. So I've got the CEO side, and you yourself are the COO,
That's right.
Chief Operations Officer. So two very important but different roles, both equally as important as each other in different domains. But maybe to frame the further discussion, why don't you provide us with a bit of a background about yourself? We were chatting before we started rolling that started in South Africa, or Argentina, South Africa, back to Argentina, the US, back to Argentina, then New Zealand. Quite the international background that you have.
Yeah, so it's somewhat that order. But yes, I'm originally from Argentina. My parents migrated to South Africa when I was 5 years old, so my childhood was actually in South Africa, and that's actually how I know my husband. We went to high school together, and we reconnected later in life. It's not that we dated throughout, but so childhood in South Africa, then finished studies in the US, went back to Argentina to see what my culture was all about, and then decided with now my husband that we wanted to be in an English-speaking country, especially for his career. And so we looked at what countries offered working holiday visas, and here we are 10, almost 11 years later.
Excellent. Fantastic. And so your background is one might think it would be, medical science or clinical research, but it's quite, you have got a different background, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I actually studied electrical engineering at Louisiana Tech University up north in Ruston. I don't know if anybody's going to know where that is. Small town, North Louisiana.
Wow.
And I really got into it because I knew I wanted, this is going to sound maybe a little bit silly, but my parents as immigrants worked really hard to send us to school. And I was like, well, what degree can I get that I know I'll have a good career so that I can kind of, maybe pay back or support them in the future. And so engineering, just always stood out. And so I got into electrical engineering. And after graduating, I decided, well, I want to get back to my roots. I want to know what my culture is all about. And I decided to go to Buenos Aires. So I'm originally from Mendoza, which is by the Andes Mountains, wine country. But job-wise, I thought, let me go to the biggest city in Argentina. So that was fun. And I actually got into the automotive industry. And so that's where I started off my career in the very heavily regulated automotive industry, working for a company that designed and manufactured the power distribution systems for vehicles. So very different to what I'm doing now, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, that's where I started off.
That's fantastic. Are you the eldest child in your family?
So, no, I'm actually the youngest. We are two.
Oh,
and so an older sister who has passed away. But so it's just me right now. But no, I'm actually the baby of the family.
Interesting, because I always find it quite interesting that the eldest children typically go for, like medicine, law, engineering. I myself tried to do medicine, not quite smart enough. So I did a BSc and a couple other degrees on top of that. But it was I can kind of relate to that. Not that we were immigrants or anything, but you do want to go, okay, well, parents work so hard so I can actually be educated. Maybe let's try and earn a lot of money to make it all there worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So pivoting from the automotive industry into health tech, med tech, what would you call Kitea Health now?
Oh, yes. Well, so the pivot really happened coming to New Zealand. I didn't perhaps do my homework and didn't realize there was absolutely no automotive industry in New Zealand. I'm told in the 80s there was, and then everything, went out. So in the beginning, it was like, oh, okay, so I have to pivot. And I applied for a job at what was back then telemetry research. So that's actually one of Simon's first startups and spin-outs out of the Auckland Bioengineering Institute. And they needed somebody really to coordinate their production. And I knew how to read electrical schematics and CAD drawings and had that knowledge and experience from production. And so they thought I would be a good fit. And that was very interesting for me to come into a space where it was spin out startup from corporate. It was quite eye-opening. I was like, wow, this is so different. But I was able to really apply everything that I had learned in a more corporate systematic structure. Right. And shortly afterwards, telemetry research was acquired by Miller Inc., which is a medical device company. And so that experience really helped in that sense because they wanted telemetry research to implement a quality management system to be up to par with those same type of controls that they were used to. And that's when Simon tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, why don't you give this a go? And I was like, oh, well, I've worked under quality management systems. I've never designed and developed one. So the deal was I would go and get educated. So I went and got a postgraduate diploma from Massey University in quality systems designs. And then that's how I actually got really deep into quality management, regulatory, and what is required to be able to have a life science product out in the market.
Yeah. How that shift from going from corporate, where it's a big giant, you've got you're siloed into small slices of the grand scheme of things, and you kind of do that job over and over again into a startup where it's like you get tapped on the shoulder and you're kind of it for that, and you have to discover it. What was that like for you? Was it exciting? Because some people hate it, some people love it.
Oh, it's definitely not for everyone. It was very exciting, but at the same time, you become very self-aware of what you don't know. So you're like, oh wow, there's this whole other area that now I have to upskill in, and I don't have 3-4 years to do that. I have maybe 2-3 months. Sure. And so really shifting that mindset into, okay, what is now priority? What are our goals and how do we get there the fastest with still assuring that there's quality involved? And so that shift of moving quite slow in a corporate world, so many different approvals to this fast-paced, okay, we've got to get it done and it's got to be done right. And so you really learn to pick out what is priority. Yeah, it's
almost as if both sides of the coin don't get it quite right.
Absolutely.
Like the startups may be a little bit too flexible, too fungible, just get it done, good enough is good enough, or maybe not quite good enough is still good enough because it's just we got to keep moving because we're going to run out of money.
Yeah, exactly.
And then at the other end, the corporate companies, they're so conservative. And like you said, millions of approvals up and down the chain, handed over to someone else who has a different idea, and then slower as a consequence. Yeah, super interesting. So, so telemetry, Miller acquired telemetry, and then you moved on to Kaha.
Yeah,
Sciences?
so Miller decided that they were going to focus on different areas, and Simon and the co-founder of telemetry research at that time, Dr. David Budgett, who's actually the COO of Junofem, they decided, well, let's bring it back to New Zealand because we know this is a great product, great market, and that's when Simon tapped me on the shoulder again. You'd think I would have learned by now, but he tapped me on the shoulder again and said, hey, how do you feel about being Chief Operations Officer of Kitea Sciences? And I thought, why not? Let's do this. And so that's how I got involved with Kitea Sciences, who was then actually acquired by 80 Instruments.
Right. So that was a step up from, say, like managerial directorship level to officer, C-suite
Yes,
level? Yeah.
definitely. That was the big
was the big
jump.
step?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the big one where it was, I would go to the executives and say, oh, I want to do this. What do you think? Whereas this time I would go to Simon. I was like, I want to do this. What do you think? And he'd turn it back around and say, well, what do you think? You're C-suite now. It's different. And so that was definitely, a change in mindset where I would always be looking to who I report to, whereas now it was, I have to look at myself. So it's like, oh dear. Yeah.
And so obviously you were very successful in that, and then from there so you're the co-founder of Kitea Health.
Yeah.
Obviously that's what I want to focus our discussions on,
Sure.
because it's just phenomenal stuff, and obviously, we'll get to it. So you're the co-founder with Dr. Malpass on Kitea Health, is that right?
Yeah. So there's So I guess how I got involved with Kitea Health was, again, Simon tapping me on the shoulder and saying, now that Kaha Sciences is done, I've got this other thing brewing, because he always had something brewing, and it was all within the Auckland Bioengineering Institute. And he said, how would you feel about being involved in this? You've got the experience, you've got, some of the knowledge. What do you think? And so getting involved with Kitea at that point was probably a year or a little bit more before the company spun out of the Auckland Bioengineering Institute. So I was actually part of the research group. And because the research group so believed in this idea and this product, that actually we all came along into Kitea. And so we're actually all co-founders. I think there was about 10 of us, but we have the three main executive co-founders are myself, Simon Malpass as CEO, and then Dr. Brian Wright as CTO of Kitea Health.
Yeah, excellent. And you all bring different skill sets and different disciplines to the picture. Having different perspectives and different backgrounds is crucial to the success of a company. So that's where you are now, but how did you find the pivot from engineering into like the business operations and the chief operating officer suite? Like it's a different skill set. You've got the fundamentals of how to design something, how to implement the quality, make sure. Then you spoke about the regulatory aspect as well, particularly in life sciences. That's pivotally important. But what was that like? Do you think, looking back, do you think it's easier to go from business to science, or it's easy to go from science grounding and then move into the business side of things?
Yeah, so I guess the first part of that question, engineering into business, with engineering, it's black and white. With quality and regulatory, it's typically black and white. Now you're in a position where you have to have almost soft skills, people skills. You have to think big picture, strategy, step back, step out of the details. Whereas engineering, it's all about the details. So that in itself was quite a challenge to think differently and take note, to step back, because I can get very much into the detail, especially when it comes to quality and regulatory. So that was one thing where I had to really shift the way I was thinking. And the other one about going from science to business, or the reverse, I am a strong believer of once one gets their education, bachelor, I forget what it's called in New Zealand, but once you get your degree, you go out and get some experience, right? And the reason is because we learn so much from what happens in a commercial setting. So science, academia, research, it's so critical. But if you cannot identify and pinpoint how to actually get that into the community, I feel like it's a loss for the community, especially in the area we're in with bioengineering, medical devices. If your research doesn't make it to the people that you want to help, then what is the point? So for me, really, I'm a strong believer that it's definitely easier to go from business to science than science first and then business. I highly recommend, and again, some of your guests might strongly disagree with me, but I highly recommend people would first go out into that industry that they are trying to impact. Not even for that long, maybe just a couple of years, just to really understand what is required in a commercial setting, and then bring that knowledge back into your science, your research, and I think it'll help actually that science and research go faster and further.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when I did my BSc, everything is so abstract, and you're learning it in the context of a university training. And for me, when I finished my BSc, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Hence doing 2 more years and finishing it with a master's.
Yeah.
That maybe did help in the long run, but it was purely because I had no idea where to go with this. Maybe that's me, but having from the outset, having a framework by which you can say, oh, we've got this cool science, but we have also people that know how to get that from the benchtop setting or the research setting into patients. I mean, that's the whole point, right?
Exactly.
I mean, there are some academics that just love to do things for the sake of doing things, and that's fine, and that does open up new avenues.
Absolutely.
But we need to translate it from the lab setting into the real world setting, and that requires people that don't just think about the nitty-gritty, but think about the bigger picture. Yeah. So you did a postgrad diploma, you mentioned quality systems management. That's a lot of syllables.
I know. I live in initialisms and acronyms all day. So I wanted to make sure that whatever I was implementing for Millar at the Auckland branch was going to be on par with what was expected and really known around the world. You know, these type of systems, quality management systems, are based on international standards and international regulation. And so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You know, this is something that has been tried and tested, and there's a good way and a bad way to do it. And I wanted to learn about what was the good way to do it. So I decided, well, I need to upskill, because that was definitely an area that I knew, again, how to work under it, but not actually how to develop it. And so that greatly helped, because I was studying and still working at the same time. So literally those abstract concepts or the theory I could apply at work. I didn't have to come up with a project out of thin air. I was working on that project, and that helped me so much to be able to actually apply in real time what I was learning to my job.
Yes. What do they say? Like being able to recall something, you'll learn at a certain proficiency, but being able to apply it is that next level of proficiency, and then be able to teach it is even further.
Absolutely.
You know, so you're crossing. If it's purely abstract, it's just recall.
Exactly.
What's the context? What's the reason? What's the why?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kitea Health, for those that may not have, I mean, shame on you for not listening to the previous episode with Simon Malpas, but Kitea Health, maybe can you provide us with like a little elevator pitch of what you're trying to achieve there? I mean, we've got more time than an elevator pitch, but you know what I mean, like the high level, and we can pull it apart from there.
Yeah, and absolutely go listen to the podcast with Simon, because he explains it really well and takes a good amount of time explaining it. So the elevator pitch is, so we're a medtech company, of course, and our main goal is really to shift the current approach of reactive care for patients with a chronic condition to what we term proactive care. So right now what we're seeing is that a patient with a chronic condition, they will have to wait for symptoms to show up and then go to the doctor or the GP and then take action. Or if in the case of a chronic condition such as heart failure, if you're exhibiting symptoms, it means unfortunately that you've already hit that critical point where you need hospitalization. So really what Kitea is focusing on is a technology platform that allows remote physiological monitoring of a chronic condition. And the area we focus on is pressure. And why pressure? Well, we know it's a health indicator, right? How your organs are, how much pressure there are in them within the body, within the blood cells. We know that there's a certain pressure that indicates you're in good health or there's a problem. So at Kitea, we've developed an implantable pressure sensor. And the idea being that it can be placed straight into the area of the body where that direct pressure reading is needed in order to be able to tell whether you're healthy or not. Our first application is in hydrocephalus, so buildup of too much fluid in the brain. Currently, it is treated with what's termed a shunt, which drains out that excess fluid in the brain that's causing that increased intracranial pressure. But there's no way to measure it at home or in real time. If you want to know what the pressure inside your brain is, you have to literally drill a hole and stick a wired ICP catheter or intracranial catheter in. So what we've developed is a pressure sensor that would go in at the same time as the shunt. The patient is sent home, obviously with the implant inside, and they are also given a reader, which they can then take measurements at home And these measurements are then transferred onto an app. They can insert some symptoms if they're not feeling very well. And all of this information is made available on a clinical portal. And so, again, clinicians can remotely monitor their patients. So it means they can treat them earlier if they see any indicators of needing intervention, or if they've got some symptoms they think maybe because the shunt is failing, they can check that. And then they can tell them, no, actually, you've got, I don't know, a flu or a bug or something else. You don't need to come into the hospital. So that's really where we're sitting at this moment.
Yeah. We'll get back to the discussion with Natalia Lopez in just a moment, but I wanted to remind you about today's sponsor, SAPPRO. If you're planning on conducting a clinical trial for your device or medicine, consider SAPPRO as your clinical trial pathway partner. Engaging SAPPRO will keep you and your collaborators on track, ensuring your strategic objectives are met and that your product is approved as soon as possible. For the small biotech or pharmaceutical company, SAPPRO offers tailored CRO solutions from start to finish with their reputable alliance partners. When it comes to your clinical trial program, don't settle for a cookie-cutter approach offered by most big CROs. Partner with SAPPRO today.
I think I mentioned this to Simon. It sounds like science fiction becoming science fact. You've got I'm pretty sure Star Trek back in the 60s had like implantable sensors for something, or like, how there's this meme of Star Trek inventing a lot of the modern technologies that we have today, like cell phones and screens and holograms, whatever.
Right.
But it's remarkable because you're remotely measuring the pressure inside the brain, which is a closed system, so you can't get in there unless you do a surgery. So, but you can over time measure the pressure within the brain. Send that the little sensor is powered, so you're getting power from outside the brain into the brain. So that's another problem as well. So the sensor, the energy, the power to the device, sending that information back out, putting it on an app. I imagine like processing it so it's actionable or readable. There's so many steps to this.
I know,
right?
I know. The only way we could have gone with a more harder path is if we did AI and machine learning, And Simon did bring that up, and I was like, no.
Gosh. Everyone's doing that now. Yeah. Big data sets. Machine learning.
No, but you're absolutely right, and that was key. I mean, it's going into the human body, so it has to be absolutely safe. So we didn't want a battery, and so it's a passive inert sensor unless it gets wirelessly energized. Right, and that's where part of the IP lies, because now you're like, well, there's a wireless power, what's the big deal? But we don't want to cook you, right? We don't want to cook tissue while we're wirelessly powering a device. And so the IP lies in being able to deliver the energy, get that data comms out without an increase in pressure, an increase in temperature.
Right.
And so that is really key for safety. Yeah. So it can be implanted deep within the body, get that energy that it needs to power up, send out that data, and it doesn't increase in temperature. That is absolutely where the sauce lies for us.
That's so cool. So the pressure sensing is not constant. It's while the device is under.
Correct. So it's while it's being energized by the external reader, which we term a wand.
Yeah.
So while it's being energized, then it is active and awake, and it will transfer for as long as you have it energized.
Yeah. I imagine there's a cutoff period, right?
Yes, we will build in a cutoff period, but you don't, the idea is to get that pressure reading of that moment in time. So you can take a pressure reading and then, wait a couple minutes, take another one, wait maybe an hour or 2 hours, depending on how you're feeling, and take another measurement. So really it doesn't need to be continuous, especially for the hydrocephalus application. It's more about that establishing a frequency of pressure readings that indicate whether you're in good health or not.
Sure. I imagine there'll be, there's a bit of variability throughout the day on these measurements anyway, so that comes into play. You're not going to do it at middle of the night, 12 p.m., 12 a.m., and then at 5 p.m. after a few glasses of wine on a Friday kind of thing.
I think you're thinking about the blood pressure cuff there, but absolutely. You put your head between your legs, the pressure in the brain is going to go up, right? So it's when, ideally you're sitting quietly, you're not too excitable, and you can take a pressure reading so you get that good, nice baseline pressure. However, remember that this is a device that will be used by children, because the condition hydrocephalus, which is our first application, it impacts predominantly children. And they are going to be very uncomfortable. They're going to be very probably upset. And so, yes, ideally you're sitting quietly. But if we think about when it'll actually be used, it'll be when some of these patients are not feeling very well. So you have to design a system that is not too prohibitive, right? It has to be, again, fit for purpose. And so that's what the system does as well.
I think it's so amazing that the more agency that you can give back into a patient or a caregiver, the better, right? Absolutely. It goes from that reactive model to the proactive model. Even in my own personal capacity, when my daughter is sick, you just turn into like the lizard-brained homunculus, from millions of years ago. You lose sense of rationality. And it's not to be critical of people. I mean, I'm very critical of myself. But, even when I'm sick, I'm like, oh, my God, do I have this, that, and the next thing? It's probably just, bad flu or whatever, or, that lump was nothing, or what have you. So it's so good to be able to put the data or put the actionable material eventually in the hands of the patient, obviously with supervision.
And education.
I think it's remarkable.
Yeah, and this is what we heard a lot from patients, that we're finally giving them access to a piece of data that has been missing, and clinicians as well. They've often used the term flying blind, because they have to admit their patients for observation over days, extensive imaging, and sometimes it's still inconclusive. So we're actually now being able to provide that very critical piece of data to be able to treat these patients. So I think patients and clinicians both just have said it's a game changer.
Yeah.
So
love it.
Yeah.
So from a business perspective, from putting your chief operations officer hat on, what have been like the big decisions that you've made, or the big hurdles that you've had to jump over, big risks you've had to take to get to the company to this point? I imagine one of the big decisions is which indication you focus on initially.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so, the company itself, we registered, I think, in May last year, but really our raise was money in the bank beginning of this year. So we've only been going really, in that commercial company setting for the past year. And the decision, interestingly enough, it hasn't been which application to approach first. We always were quite clear about that. We had quite a lot of feedback from consultants and experts in that space, and we feel quite confident with our strategy. I must say that the harder parts of this job is hiring new staff. I was thinking about this when you mentioned this earlier, the question earlier to me, and because the setting of the culture is so critical, that was probably the area where I felt the most hesitant, or not hesitant, but a bit wary about, oh my gosh, we're going to bring these people into our team. We're a very close-knit team. Yep. Most of us have been working together at least a decade, some of us. And so it was really identifying people that would not only bring technical expertise, but would they actually fit the team? That has actually been the most challenging, believe it or not.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you think that's a dearth of expertise or people in New Zealand, or is it just making sure that you get it right the first time, because it will have downstream implications on probably a lot of different areas in the business?
Yes, I think it's a combination of both of those. As you know, New Zealand, we're very small, so the pool that you can pick from is not as vast. And also, especially when we were hiring, so was the rest of the world because of coming back from COVID. Right. And so, you're competing with really, Europe and the US and Australia even. But because our team, as I said, we were quite large when we first spun out. When you think about a university spin out, we were already quite large. There was 10 of us. There were a couple of critical roles that needed filling. And so it was about, is that skill in New Zealand? But also they're in it it's a long journey, and we want our people with us for that journey. So would they fit? So it's definitely twofold. Yeah. The skill set and the culture fit, and I think we've done pretty damn well. Yeah, we've got some fantastic people that have joined the team.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you don't have the right people to do the job, technically speaking, or cultural fit, then they're not going to deliver, and then you can have a fantastic group of original founders, but you can't do everything.
I know. Even though in the beginning you do,
You want
but
to be
you
able to-
shouldn't
yeah,
keep.
yeah.
Yeah, you shouldn't. That shouldn't be the model going forward.
That's interesting. So maybe if you could wave a magic wand and solve that being the biggest issue for a New Zealand-based startup company, what would it be? Is it more interest in science, or is it business people that have,
Yeah, I think to try to solve that, we're going to have to go abroad. Unfortunately, we just don't have that base here. But if I look, and you had Diana Sue on your podcast, and she spoke really well about how much just this medtech sector, especially looking at spin-outs and startups, how much has happened in the last 10 years. It's amazing. And I think to be able to continue at that growth rate, we're going to have to look abroad. And so what are some things that perhaps New Zealand can offer that you have to be able to compete with some very high salaries, right? Some of the markets out there, they give some very high salaries. We can't always compete at that level. So what do we have to offer? Is it a work-life balance? You're in a startup. So,
there is none.
yeah. So, so it's these amazing ideas. I mean, who doesn't want to come work for a company that's putting sensors in brains and hearts? Wireless power, wireless data, science fiction, science fact. You said it to yourself. So really, if we're coming up with these amazing ideas, I think people will want to come work here in New Zealand, regardless of salary. Of course, it's important. Another thing that we believe strongly in is equity or ESOPs, right? Having a good amount set aside to make sure you can attract that talent. Now, the one thing that is perhaps hurting us at the moment is that in New Zealand, I'm not too sure about Australia, but in New Zealand, they will tax ESOP, right? So it's not as attractive as in, I believe, the US, they don't. So you kind of have that same tax setting as you do if you've got write out shares in the company. I did hear that with this new government coming in, they are willing to look at it, so that might change. But that was something that we had to consider when setting up that ESOP pie, is that, well, in New Zealand, it's taxed, so it's not going to be as juicy as if we were somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I do, not to go down the political route, because it's not a political podcast, but I do hope that with changing of the guard and some of the, no party is ever going to be perfect. No government will. But at least in our industry, there have been some suggestions that they will look at certain things.
Yes.
And a raft of different things as well. So, I do hope that happens because I've said this before. We can't expect ourselves to maintain a wealthy country if we're relying on farming and if we're relying on tourism. And we need big ideas, attracting people to make those ideas from the benchtop setting into reality. That's where the value is. Huge value, especially if you can export that to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
As opposed to, a few photos of a mountain and some blocks of cheese.
Yeah, we have to diversify, right? It's like if you look at New Zealand as a corporate, all your eggs in one basket, you get another pandemic, we're going to be in a bad situation. And yeah, definitely with New Zealand's size, IP and technology and those really great ideas, I think those need to be supported. And we've been fortunate that we received the Trailblazer grant from Callahan. And so those type of initiatives are absolutely the right way to go to help companies such as ourselves to really move fast, but also bring in that talent that we need to in order to achieve these really monumental goals that we've set for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's almost that the governments do have a responsibility to make possible, to incentivize, the hard work that startup people do. Like you said, work-life balance is a little bit squiffy in most cases because it's just we need to deliver, otherwise we're going to run out of money. So let's just get it done. And it's also high risk. So private capital, a little bit less of that. I mean, there's venture capital, but they play a slightly different role as well. Kind of crossing between benchtop into that initial proof of concept. A lot of that is government funding. And Simon mentioned, $1 million doesn't actually go very far. It sounds like a lot of money.
It does.
Buy you an average house in Auckland.
Yeah.
But you need about 5.
Yes.
To actually make it happen, because
Exactly.
$1 million will be like a couple staff in an office location, some research
Yeah.
for 6 months.
For 6 months, exactly. I was about to say maybe half a year if you're lucky. Absolutely. Yeah. So government, and that's where definitely they can play a role in helping the Kiteas, the Alimetries of New Zealand really take off in this industry specifically. Why? Because it's so heavily regulated as well, right? We can't leave that aside. Not only are we in deep tech, but we're in deep tech that is so heavily regulated that we need to consider that for our timelines and our budgets. And $1 million doesn't scratch the surface.
No, I mean, that wouldn't even do a quarter of a trial.
Exactly.
Wouldn't even scrape the sides, touch the sides, whatever you want to say. So looking forward, so attracting new people, making the money available for the bright ideas to actually do it. You've achieved that now. You've got the good team. You've got a bit of money, and you're doing a trial next year. That's your first in human trial in hydrocephalus.
Yeah, so Dr. Sarah Jane Guild, who leads up our clinical and preclinical team, and Simon were granted a health research grant, a project grant. And so Kitea's role is to really support that first-in-human trial at Auckland City Hospital, but really it's being driven through the university, and Kitea is providing the support and the product for this. And so it's really a collaborative situation, and it benefits, I think, everybody involved in that we can actually conduct the trial, get this product into patients' hands and doctors' hands, and also be able to save a little bit on the budget to, again, expand that or extend the runway for Kitea.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you following a standard clinical trial model with a CRO, contract research organization?
No, we're not using a CRO. We are definitely following the standard GCP approach. We have to, because this data is what we will provide to the FDA as well. But also, why wouldn't you, right? It's a clinical trial. Good clinical practice is the guidelines that are recognized around the world to be good and will result in a really safe and worthwhile trial. So we are doing it directly through a group at Auckland City Hospital who assists with that. But no, it's predominantly Sarah Jane and Simon that are doing all the heavy lifting.
That's excellent. I mean, that will really. So it's. I mean, Simon mentioned that you've done the proof of concept in animals, but this is the first in human, which is kind of proof of concept in its own right. Can we achieve what we are trying to achieve in man? Correct. And that will then open up. There'll be future studies down the pipeline with greater sample size, and then gather more data for your registration. Yes. But if you prove that it works and it's safe, and safe is the pivotal aspect, isn't it? The world will be your oyster.
That's the plan, Charles. The trial itself, it's safety and tolerability, and we've done a lot of work beforehand to make sure it is safe. As you mentioned, animal trials, we think the first in human will be easier. Sheep are not that compliant, so we think it'll be actually easier in the first in human. But really seeing, okay, what is this interaction like for patients? How do they feel about the product, the process, the system? There's a great opportunity to really acknowledge what patients and clinicians want, right? And so we think, we've made sure it's safe. Let's check it, in humans for those probable clinical benefits, but also let's learn from it and improve the product. Safety is number one with this trial. Yeah.
And maybe to finish off, what are the other indications that eventually you'll be looking at? I think I saw heart failure is one.
Yeah. I guess what we have to recognize here with Kitea is that we truly are a technology platform, right? So our main IP is wireless power, wireless communication. And pressure is where we've focused on, because that is where our expertise and knowledge is. Yep. But if you think about it from an implantable device, really the indications and the applications are quite vast. However, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So we've started with hydrocephalus, but the larger market that is in our sights is the heart failure market. And so this is where the implant would go into the pulmonary artery and be used to remotely monitor patients who are suffering heart failure. So class 2 and class 3 heart failure. There's a couple of players in that space already in the US. And so we felt that hydrocephalus, there's nobody doing what we're doing. There's nobody able to provide the data that we will provide. Yep. And so really, again, going back to that strategy, hydrocephalus made a lot of sense to us, not only from a business perspective, but from a complete unmet clinical need perspective. And then once we have that, really that product and market, we've proved ourselves, we've proved the product, then it's an easier pivot to heart failure space.
Yeah, so you're kind of achieving both things at the same time, demonstrating the utility of the IP, and then you've got the proof of concept, the clinical need is being addressed, and then throughout that time frame, you've ironed out all the really difficult questions that you can just take that platform and apply it to other areas. Yeah. So cool. Yeah. Well, this has been so just enjoyable for me. I'm really, really like speaking to people like yourselves that are really making some fantastic ideas a reality in New Zealand. Where can people go if they want to find out more about yourself, Kitea, or any other exploits?
Yeah, so of course we have a website, kiteahealth.com, but really LinkedIn is where we try to keep everybody up to date. Obviously, we're on LinkedIn. That's about the only socials we have, and I think we'll stick to that. But yeah, please do follow us. We also, if people are interested in this topic from a clinical perspective, a patient perspective, anything like that, we're more than happy to hear from people. We really learn a lot when we go out and we speak with the community. So really would like to see some of that engagement. Absolutely.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. Well, really looking forward to see what you guys get up to in the new year, 2024. Sounds like it's going to be action-packed and
busy.
Yeah, very, very busy. Yeah. And good luck with the work-life balance.
Thanks, Charles. Same to you, actually. You're quite busy.
Big time. 3-year-old keeps me on my toes as well.
Oh,
so
mine's also 3, so I get it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can bring them together and they can occupy each other, because that's always helpful.
Create chaos.
Indeed. Awesome. Thanks so much.
No, thank you for having me, Charles.